Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. So for those of you that don't know, yesterday it was finally revealed that after years of suffering through the TCG, we are finally getting a second Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. Speed dueling, the type of dueling played in Vrains and on Duel Links, is being sanctioned, with introductory decks released in November. While we don't know the specifics of the eventual card pool, it seems likely that it'll follow Duel Links legality, eventually printing the several hundred Duel Links playables in paper in their new card frame. I know some of you at the very least will be wanting to hit the ground running and be competitive right from the get-go, so I figured this would be a good time to let the uneducated masses in on the ground floor of what's playable. Today, we'll be looking at a pick and mix of cool speed duel decks. So here's the first list, Amazonas. This deck is one of the more budget-friendly options in Duel Links, with most of the cards available either as victory rewards, ranked tickets, or by leveling up. This list also provides context for Konami's policy of printing multiple one-card pieces of legacy support for long-dead archetypes. Apparently, it was always to give speed duels a boost. We'll be testing these decks at King of Games, which is probably a bad idea, since once you get to their Legend equivalent, people just screw around with their pet decks, but that's where I'm at, so that's what you get. Amazonas is currently one of the most powerful decks in speed dueling, and with good reason. Their extremely powerful advantage engine, Amazonas Princess, sets up access to their trap card, which turns all of their monsters into non-destruction removal spells. They've also got access to one copy of Amazonas Queen through level up rewards, which is a stellar option for a format with decidedly little non-battle removal. We're playing Parasite Infestation as our skill, as this is one of the few decks that doesn't particularly need any special help from their skill, and blanking an opponent's draw is pretty good. So with that, let's do the card by card. We're playing 3 copies of Amazonas Princess, one of our most important search target, Amazonas Queen, 3 copies of Amazonas Swordswoman, who comes in handy when you take too much damage from attacking into a more powerful monster, then our one-ofs, 1 copy of Sage to test for back row, 1 copy of Tiger as an additional beater with a lure effect, and 1 copy of Baby Tiger as a recurable sack outlet. After that are 2 Forbidden Chalice, pretty good against the rest of the meta, for hire, Spellbook, and the Mirror, 1 copy of Jade Insect Whistle as reach, 3 copies of Floodgate Trap Hole, 1 Treacherous Trap Hole, somehow still playable with 6 other traps, Willpower, the worst search target but better than getting a second Onslaught if you draw it, and 2 copies of Onslaught, which lets you summon an Amazon from your hand in the battle phase and lets your Amazons banish the monster they battle. Let's jump into the game. Our Amazonas match is going to be up against Cyber Dragon OTK. For those of you that don't know, Duel Links releases characters individually, and some of their skills enable very interesting strategies. Right now, Zane Truesdale has just come out, so everyone on Cog Ladder is trying to make Cyber Dragon work. We get to go first, which is excellent news since we have so many traps. We draw into a couple of them. 2 Floodgate Trap Hole is excellent, but these other 2 traps do nothing. Unfortunately, this Amazonas Onslaught and this Amazonas Willpower, without an Amazonas in our hand, are less than worthless. Our opponent's going to draw, and what do they have but a threat? Cyber Dragon Dry does have a lot of attack points. We're going to take it here instead of flipping a Floodgate because I have a sneaking suspicion I may need an additional one. We draw, and thank God it's Amazonas Princess. We'll go to battle phase so we can special summon her and take slightly less damage. We will attack directly after we add another copy of this Amazonas Onslaught to our hand. Of course, our monster can beat our opponents, but once we get our copy of Amazonas Queen from our deck, it doesn't matter. We're going to take 100 points of damage, then banish it with the effect of Amazonas Onslaught. Our opponent's going to draw and then pass. Apparently they're bricking. That's good news for us. We're going to attack directly with Amazonas Queen. We don't have lethal, but we can attack directly with Amazonas Princess, and this card should put us over the edge. We're going to use Amazonas Onslaught to special summon Amazonas Tiger with its lure effect and attack directly. Unfortunately, my opponent is playing Karibo. That does not bode well. It means I am likely to be OTK'd. We're at 2100 life points, and my opponent can now activate Cyber Style to special summon 3 copies of Proto Cyber Dragon. They've also drawn King of the Swamp so they can get a polymerization to their hand. This is looking a little grim, but we have a couple of floodgates set. They're going to activate polymerization and fusion summon Cyber End Dragon. This is kind of like the GX anime right now. Thankfully, they can't kill us just yet because we have copies of Floodgate Trap Hole set. We will flip over one now, putting that sucker in face down defense mode, but oh no, my opponent has a copy of Enemy Controller. We look dead until you remember that unfortunately for our opponent, Amazonas Tiger has a lure effect. We are going to live with 100 life points to our opponent's 400, and what do we draw but Jade Insect Whistle. This is going to do at the very least 1000 points of damage to our opponent. They reveal their set card is absolutely nothing. We'll put Parasite on top of their deck, then attack, always wanting to play around the Karibos that we know my opponent plays. Our second deck is Spellbook. That's right, Spellbook is legal. Spellbook is an incredibly popular deck with two different builds, one of which plays 30 cards and that grass looks greener, and one of which for the rich among us that plays 3 copies of a card you have to buy with actual physical money, Silent Magician. We're examining the latter, whose game plan is to find Silent Magician if possible, then play Spellbook of Fate 3 times over 3 turns for maximum value. It turns out that almost every deck can't deal with banishing their normal summon, and when their backup plans demand spell cards, Silent Magician takes care of the rest. We're playing Restart because as consistent as the deck is, we're able to abuse this skill and mulligan as hard as possible for Silent Magician. The hands that make her are eons better than the hands that don't. So with that, let's get into the card by card. First, we have Silent Magician level 8, who Silent Magician floats into, followed by 3 Silent Magician, who can be special summoned by tributing Blue Boy and negates spells. After that is 3 Blue Boy himself, followed by the books. 3 copies of Spellbook of Secrets, 3 copies of Spellbook of Fate, 1 copy of Spellbook of Power. We have to have something to activate turn 1 to get the book count to 3 in Graveyard, and it helps this deck with 3 monsters in it, push for lethal, 2 copies of Spellbook of Eclipse to refill the Graveyard, 3 copies of Spellbook of the Master, and 1 Treacherous Trap Hole. Let's jump into a game. Our Spellbook match is up against Cyber Dark Dragons, and while that may seem extremely janky, remember that like Amazon, this archetype has received some new support that has weaseled its way into Duel Links. It is very possible this deck is potentially quite good. We're going second, which is not good news for Spellbook. They don't like to get set up on. Our opponent's on Balance, a skill that can effectively guarantee you find certain cards in your opening hand based on your deck composition. They're going to activate that Grass Looks Greener, milling a whole bunch of cards, set one spell or trap, and pass it back to us. So things are looking okay. We're going to activate Spellbook of Secrets to find Spellbook of the Master. We do have access to Fate this turn. We're going to normal summon this copy of Spellbook Magician of Prophecy to get ourselves a Spellbook of Fate. Afterwards, we'll activate Spellbook of the Master, revealing the Fate that we just added to our hand to activate the effect of Secrets once again, getting Eclipse. We'll activate this copy of Spellbook of Power, and I get a little greedy here, opting to attack instead of just banishing with Fate. Unfortunately, the Dark Hex-Sealed Fusion does have 100 more defense than I am comfortable with. Our opponent's going to activate Hey Trunade. I will chain the effect of Spellbook of Fate, banishing this copy of the Dark Hex-Sealed Fusion, not looking to get Cyberdarked. Our opponent's going to return this Treacherous Trap Hole to our hand, then activate the effect of Cyberdark Edge, but there's nothing in the graveyard for it. Still, she's able to attack over this copy of Blue Boy, which means we will need to search one off of this Spellbook of Secrets this turn. We draw into Silent Magician, one of the better draws remaining in our deck. We'll normal summon this copy of Blue Boy we searched off of Secrets. That's going to add a copy of Spellbook of Fate to our hand once again. We'll immediately tribute summon this copy of Spellbook Magician, then activate this copy of Spellbook of Eternity to return Master to the hand. Because our opponent knows of Fate, it's no big deal that we reveal it, to activate Spellbook of Eternity again, leaving only 1 card in our banished zone and a copy of Spellbook of Secrets in our hand. We're going to attack over their copy of Cyberdark Edge. They'll flip a copy of Needlebug Nest to add a couple more cards to their graveyard and then draw. They draw into a copy of Cyberdark Horn, and while they do finally have targets in the graveyard, we will just banish it upon activation of its effect. We're going to banish 3 cards for Spellbook of Fate and get it out of our life. We should be able to win quite easily from this position. We're going to activate the effect of Spellbook of Secrets to get another Blue Boy. Some of you may be familiar with the length that these games can take. Get another copy of Eclipse from our deck to our hand. Our deck is almost exclusively additional copies of Silent Magician and Silent Magician level 8 at this point. We add a Fate from our banished zone back to our hand with this copy of Eclipse, so we have 2 in hand, 1 for next turn with the couple of straggling copies of Spellbooks in our graveyard. We'll put our opponent down to 1300 and then pass it back. Our opponent draws, and thankfully it's something we can deal with. A quick play spell that does absolutely nothing because she has no board presence. We draw, and that should be the end of the game. Our third and final deck is Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, and this deck has seen better days. For a few beautiful weeks this was the best deck on ladder, but now it's been power crept to hell. Despite that, it occasionally gets support and can easily catch back row players off guard. With access to Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys via Cards of the Soul, we can all but guarantee that we find it in our opening hand alongside a suite of Fire Kings and Goka that help destroy multiple copies on the first turn. If we live past the first turn, we can bring back multiple copies, destroying all spells and trap cards on the field, and then using the beatdown skill to get over those pesky monsters with over 2400 attack. So with that, let's get into the card by card. We have 3 copies of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, 3 copies of Goka, the Pyre of Malice, who truthfully more often than not becomes our win condition, 3 copies of Fire King Beirog, and 3 copies of Fire King Yaksha, the latter of which destroys phoenixes in hand without necessarily sacrificing them next turn to Fire King Island's effect. Since we're playing a bad deck with no semi-limited cards, we get to play 2 copies of Enemy Controller, followed up by 3 Fire King Island, probably the most important card in the deck, and 3 Cards of the Soul. Let's jump into a game. Our match as Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys is going to be up against, surprise surprise, a back row control player. Now neither me nor my opponent is playing a top tier strategy, but one fun thing you get to see at King of Games is people trying out alternative decks. Our opponent is using the very powerful suite of back row available to almost every deck, alongside some very interesting monsters, like this one. They summon Cat's Ear Tribe, which changes the attack of any monster that an opponent attacks it with to 200 during the damage step only. We're going to activate Card of the Soul, getting another Sacred Phoenix out of our deck, then normal summoning a copy of Fire King Beirog. We'll destroy him with this copy of Goka in our hand so we can get his effect a little later, set this copy of Enemy Controller, trigger Beatdown to tilt our opponent, I suppose, then pass it back. We're going to use the effect of Fire King Avatar Beirog to get ourselves a copy of Yaksha to our hand. Our opponent's going to flip Fire Formation Gyoki, and oh my goodness, suddenly the Cat's Ear Tribe is a threat. It's not like I can attack over it, because the monster will just become a 200 attack point monster, and it's got 300 permanently. We're going to use Fire King Island to destroy a copy of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, but I have no problem waiting. We're going to normal summon a Yaksha, because eventually that destruction will get us a second copy of Sacred Phoenix as well. Our opponent's going to draw, and they're going to pass back to us. They don't put a lot of positive pressure on the board. We're going to activate the Grave effect of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, bring it back to the board, and Heavy Storm. Unfortunately, Fire King Island's effect is going to destroy all of our monsters, but we can get a Beirog from our hand to our side of the field, and destroy an additional monster with the Yaksha that went to the graveyard from the effect of Fire King Island. That's going to get us another copy of Sacred Phoenix next turn. We'll ram into this copy of Cat's Ear Tribe, and knowing the Heavy Storm is just going to return next turn, our opponent concedes. So that's that. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of some of the cool and interesting options that will likely become available as speed duels become completely sanctioned. Remember, I'm presuming that the Duel Links card pool will be printed as speed duel legal, so don't blame me if I hype you up and then you have to play Gemini Elf Beatdown for months. If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/monobluetron every weekend, and if you want me to look at a specific deck or archetype on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comments section below or on my Discord. Otherwise, I'll see you Monday.